I felt the heat before I saw the kettle. The kind of heat that makes your skin prickle with animal warning. The kind that screams danger in a language older than words. My father's hand was shaking. Knuckles white around the handle. And for one frozen heartbeat, I watched boiling water arc through the air toward my face. It missed. Barely. The scalding liquid exploded against the granite counter, 6 inches from where I stood. Droplets hitting my cheek like tiny brands. Steam erupting between us in a cloud so thick, I couldn't see his eyes anymore. Just the shape of him, towering and trembling with a rage so pure it had weight. Behind me, my 7-year-old son was screaming. Not crying. Screaming. The kind of sound that comes from a child who's just watched his grandfather try to disfigure his mother's face, and in front of me, perched on the leather sofa, like a queen on her throne, my sister Serafina threw her head back and laughed. High and bright and delighted. Like she'd just witnessed the funniest joke instead of attempted assault. My father's voice cut through the steam. Each word deliberate as a knife thrust. You don't give orders in this house. You're garbage pretending to be precious. Serafina is a gem. Gems need protection. Garbage needs to remember its place. My mother walked past me. Didn't even pause. Didn't check if I was burned. Didn't acknowledge that her husband had just weaponized boiling water against her daughter while their grandson watched. She went straight to Serafina, smoothing her golden hair, murmuring comfort to the woman who'd been beating my child 5 minutes earlier. That was the moment I died. Not physically, emotionally. The part of me that had spent 30 years begging for their love, that had sacrificed everything hoping they'd finally see me, that had convinced myself family meant something sacred. That part turned to ash right there in their pristine kitchen, and from those ashes, something colder was born. Something that understood that you can't reason with people who've decided you're disposable. You can't appeal to the conscience of people who don't believe you deserve basic human dignity. You can only document, prepare, and strike back with the only weapons that matter in this world. Evidence, law, consequences. I wrapped my arms around Jax and carried him out of that room. His face buried in my shoulder. His small body shaking so hard I could feel it in my bones. And I made him a promise in the darkness of my mind. A promise I had no idea how I'd keep, but knew I had to. I would get us out. I would make them pay. Not with violence or drama, but with something far more devastating. I would take away their power. But here's what you need to understand before I tell you how I did it. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever been the one sacrificing everything while golden children take and take and take, if you've ever wondered whether you're crazy for thinking your family is toxic because they smile while they destroy you, this story is for you. It gets dark. It gets worse before it gets better. But it does get better. And the revenge is so much sweeter than you can imagine. Hit that like button right now if you're ready to hear how a doormat became a demolition expert, how I turned years of abuse into a legal weapon, and how I made my family face consequences for the first time in their entitled lives. Subscribe because you're going to want to see what happened when they realized the invisible daughter had been watching, documenting, and planning all along. And drop a comment if you've ever had to fight your own family just to protect yourself or your kids, because your story matters too. Now let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand exactly how deep this nightmare went before you can appreciate how completely I dismantled it. I was 22 when Serafina was born, and from the moment she entered the world, I ceased to exist. That sounds dramatic. I know, but it's the truth stripped of all the pretty lies families tell themselves. My parents, Robert and Eleanor, looked at her like she was spun from starlight and gold thread. She had these enormous blue eyes, this perfect porcelain skin, and by the time she was 3, strangers would stop my mother on the street to compliment her beauty. My mother would beam like she'd personally crafted a masterpiece. And me, I was the rough draft they'd rather forget. Brown hair instead of blonde. Average height instead of willowy. Competent instead of captivating. I was useful. That's what I was. Useful for babysitting. Useful for cooking when mom was too busy entering Serafina into pageants. Useful for working part-time jobs to help pay for Serafina's dance classes and designer clothes, and all the things that would showcase her gifts to the world. Nobody asked if I minded. Nobody asked what I wanted. The family had found its treasure, and I was simply the box it came in. Functional, Forgettable. Required to protect the precious thing inside, but never valued for my own sake. I told myself it was fine. I told myself that loving someone meant sacrifice. That being a big sister meant putting her needs first. That maybe if I just helped enough, proved myself enough, made myself indispensable enough, they'd see me too. They'd realize I mattered. That delusion lasted until I was 29 and pregnant with Jax. His father was a mistake I'd made in college. A relationship that imploded before I could even tell him about the baby. When I told my parents I was keeping the child, my father looked at me with something between disappointment and disgust. "You're going to raise a bastard," he said. Like it was 1,850 and I'd brought shame upon the family name. "What will people think?" "I think they'll think I'm a mother doing her best," I replied. But my voice shook. It always shook around him. My mother pursed her lips. "Well, you'll have to manage it yourself. We have Serafina's wedding to pay for. She's marrying a doctor. You know, Assurgent? Very prestigious family." Of course she was. Serafina always landed on her feet. Always found someone to catch her. Someone to fund her. Someone to worship at the altar of her beauty. And I was expected to applaud. I worked 2 jobs through my pregnancy. I delivered Jax on a Tuesday morning after a 12-hour shift at the diner. And when I called my parents from the hospital, my mother said, "Oh, that's nice, dear. Serafina is in Milan for Fashion Week." She sent us the most darling photos. That should have been my first clue. But I was drowning in postpartum exhaustion and medical bills and the overwhelming terror of keeping a tiny human alive on my own. So I did what I'd always done. I kept my head down. Kept working. Kept trying to be enough. Jax was the only perfect thing in my life. He had my eyes and my stubborn chin. And when he was 3 months old, he'd grip my finger while he slept like I was his entire world. Because I was. It was just us against everything. And I promised him every single night that I'd give him the childhood I never had. I'd make sure he felt seen. Valued. Loved unconditionally. Then Serafina's marriage fell apart. Turned out the surgeon husband didn't appreciate her maxing out his credit cards or sleeping with his colleague. The divorce was nuclear. And suddenly my beautiful, celebrated sister was back in our parents' house with nothing but her looks and her entitlement. And she was bored. Dangerously. Viciously bored. Jax was 4 when the cruelty started. Little things at first. Serafina would accidentally step on his toys, crushing them under her designer heels. She'd change the channel when he was watching cartoons, claiming she needed to watch her shows and he was just a child. He won't remember anyway. She'd criticize everything about him. Too loud. Too messy. Too needy. Why did he cry so much? Why couldn't he sit still? Why was he so ordinary? I'd intervene gently at first, suggesting maybe she could be kinder. Maybe children needed patience. Maybe she could remember what it felt like to be small and powerless. She'd look at me with those stunning blue eyes and smile like I was something stuck to her shoe. "You're so sensitive." "Lana, I'm just playing." "God. No wonder he's such a crybaby with you, coddling him constantly." My father would grunt in agreement from behind his newspaper. My mother would murmur something about children needing to toughen up. And I'd swallow my anger like bitter medicine because what choice did I have? I was living in their house. I couldn't afford my own place. Not with childcare costs and student loans and all the financial support they'd tripped me into providing for Serafina's fresh start. Yes, you read that right. I was helping fund my sister's lifestyle while she tormented my son. The verbal abuse escalated. By the time Jax was 6, Serafina had perfected the art of saying devastating things in a playful tone. "You know, Jax, some kids are special and some are just, well, there. Guess which one you are." She'd laugh like it was a joke, ruffle his hair too roughly, and walk away, while he blinked back tears. She'd compare him to other children constantly. Emma's son won 3rd place in the science fair. "What did you do today?" "Jax, oh right. You failed another spelling test. How embarrassing for your mother." When I confronted her, she'd act wounded. "I'm trying to motivate him." "Lana, you baby him too much. Someone needs to prepare him for the real world." My father would nod sagely. "She has a point. The boy needs backbone." My mother would add, Serafina only wants what's best for him. She's always been so wise beyond her years. I felt like I was going insane. Was I overreacting? Was I too protective? Was I failing Jax by being too soft or failing him by not protecting him enough? The doubt ate at me like acid. Then came the physical escalation. Jax was 7 when I walked into the living room and found Serafina gripping his wrist so tightly her knuckles were white. She was twisting it. Just enough to hurt, but not enough to leave obvious marks. And hissing at him about how he'd gotten fingerprints on her phone. "Please stop." Jax whimpered. His face crumpled in pain and fear. I'm sorry. I won't touch your stuff again." "You better not. You little pest." She spat, giving his wrist one final wrench before releasing him. I stepped between them so fast I didn't even think. "Don't you ever put your hands on him again?" She laughed. "That cold?" Crystalline laugh. She'd perfected in her pageant days. "Or what you'll tell Daddy, please. He knows kids need discipline." She was right. When I tried to tell my father what I'd seen, he dismissed it immediately. Boys need to learn respect. Serafina was teaching him a lesson. "You're too soft. Lana. You always have been." That night I held Jax while he cried himself to sleep, and I stared at the ceiling fan making its lazy circles overhead and wondered how my life had become this small and suffocating. How had I let it get this bad? When had I become so powerless in my own story? The breaking point came on a Saturday morning in April. I was making breakfast, scrambling eggs for Jax, when I heard him yelp from the living room. Not a surprised yelp, a pain yelp. I ran. Serafina had him cornered against the bookshelf, and she was hitting him. Not spanking. Not a single swat on the bottom, but hitting, sharp, deliberate strikes to his arms, his shoulders, anywhere she could reach, while he tried to protect himself. "You spilled juice on my magazine," she was saying, her voice eerily calm. "Do you know how much that subscription costs? Do you know how worthless you are? You're like a little rat, scurrying around breaking things, ruining everything beautiful." Something in me snapped, not like breaking, like igniting. I crossed that room in 3 strides, grabbed Serafina's wrist, mid-swing, and yanked her away from my son. So hard she stumbled. "Touch him again, and I swear to God I will make you regret it," I said, and my voice didn't shake. For the first time in my entire life, my voice didn't shake. Serafina's eyes widened, then narrowed. "Daddy," she called out, her voice shifting to that little girl sweetness she used when she wanted something. "Daddy." "Lana's hurting me." Robert appeared in the doorway. He was still in his bathrobe, coffee mug in one hand, and when he saw the scene, his face transformed into something ugly and unfamiliar. Except it wasn't unfamiliar. I'd seen glimpses of this rage before, always directed at me, always over my failures to properly serve the family's needs. "Let her go," he said quietly. "She was hitting Jax," I said, not releasing Serafina's wrist. "She was hitting my son. Let her go." I did, and Serafina immediately ran to our father, pressing her face against his chest, playing the victim with practiced ease. "She grabbed me so hard," Serafina whimpered. "I was just telling Jax to be more careful, and she attacked me." My father's hand moved before I could process what was happening. He grabbed the kettle from the stove, the one I'd been heating for tea, and he slammed it down on the granite counter inches from where I stood. Boiling water exploded outward, droplets hitting my arm, my face, steam engulfing us. Jax screamed. I stood frozen, feeling the burn, but not moving, not breathing, just staring at my father's face and seeing absolutely nothing there. No love, no regret, not even anger anymore, just cold calculation. "You don't give orders in this house," he said, each word precise and deadly. "You're nothing but garbage pretending to be precious. Serafina is a gem. Gems need protection. Garbage needs to remember its place." My mother walked past me like I was a piece of furniture, going to comfort Serafina. "Accidents happen when trash tries to compete with beauty," Eleanor said in that flat, emotionless voice she used when she was at her cruelest. "You should be more careful." "Lana." Jax was sobbing, clutching my leg. Serafina was smirking over our father's shoulder. Robert calmly returned to his seat and opened his newspaper, and something inside me died. Not the part that felt pain. I wish it had been that. No. The part that died was the part that hoped. The part that kept believing that maybe, someday, if I just tried hard enough, they'd love me. They'd see me. They'd protect my son the way they protected Serafina. That part was ash now. Good riddance. What replaced it was something colder and infinitely more useful. I'd been playing a rigged game my entire life, trying to win affection from people who decided I was worthless before I could even speak. I'd been trying to be good enough, kind enough, helpful enough. I'd been the family's beast of burden and called it love. But my son was not going to inherit that role. My son was not going to grow up believing his value was measured by how much abuse he could silently absorb. If they wanted to treat me like garbage, fine. I'd been trained for that role my entire life. But garbage doesn't play by the rules of pretty, fragile things. Garbage is useful, precisely because everyone underestimates it. Because no one's watching what garbage does. I knelt down and hugged Jax, drying his tears with my burned hands, whispering promises I intended to keep. Then I stood up, walked to my room, and opened my laptop. I enrolled in an online course that night, Child Protective Services and Family Advocacy. I wanted to understand the system from the inside. I wanted to know how cases were built, what evidence mattered, who had power, and how to access it. I wanted to learn the language of protection, the bureaucracy of intervention, the loopholes and procedures and documentation requirements that separated children who got help from children who didn't. My father thought I was worthless. My mother thought I was furniture. Serafina thought I was a joke. Good. Let them think that. Underestimated people get away with so much more. I started documenting everything the next day. I bought a small notebook, the kind that fits in a purse, and I began recording incidents with the detached precision of a scientist. Date, time, location, what was said, what was done, who witnessed it. No emotional language. No adjectives like cruel or horrible. Just facts. April 15th, 3:47 p.m. Living room. Serafina struck Jax 4 times on the arms and shoulders for spilling juice on her magazine. Visible red marks. Jax cried for 20 minutes afterward. Robert and Eleanor present. Took no action. April 18th, 8:30 a.m. Kitchen. Serafina called Jax worthless vermin in front of neighbor Mrs. Davis, who was dropping off mail. Mrs. Davis looked uncomfortable but said nothing. April 22nd, 6:15 p.m. Jax's bedroom. Found Jax hiding under his bed. He said Serafina threatened to make him disappear if he told me about earlier incident. Jax was shaking. I took photos of his state. Timestamp it. On and on and on. Every single thing. Recorded with clinical accuracy. I volunteered at a family support clinic, 3 evenings a week. I told my parents it was for community service hours for a certificate program, which was technically true. What I didn't tell them was that I was learning how protective services actually worked in practice. Not just theory. I was meeting social workers and hearing them talk about what made a strong case versus a weak one. I was understanding the difference between concerning and actionable. Most importantly, I was building relationships. When you volunteer somewhere long enough, consistently enough, people start to trust you. They start to tell you things. Like which judges were most responsive to child welfare cases. Which schools had the best protocols for mandatory reporting. Which documentation would hold up in court and which would be dismissed as hearsay. I was methodical. I was patient. I smiled and nodded when my father made his casual cruelties. I swallowed my rage when Serafina tormented Jax. I cooked their meals and cleaned their messes and played my role as the family servant because I was building something they couldn't see. The financial exploitation continued. My parents would call asking for money for Serafina's needs. A new wardrobe because she had important networking events. Money for a car repair. Rent for the apartment she insisted on keeping even though she lived with them. Because she needed space to find herself. I stopped responding with immediate yeses. I started asking questions. What networking events specifically? Can you send me the repair invoice? Have you considered a roommate to help with rent? They were outraged by my audacity. How dare I question their needs? Didn't I understand family obligation? But here's the thing about people who've exploited you for years. They're not used to resistance. They're used to you folding immediately, grateful for the scraps of attention they throw your way. When you stop folding, they don't know what to do. My father called me ungrateful. My mother called me selfish. Serafina called me jealous. I took notes on all of it. I also started refusing their calls after 9 p.m. Started saying no to babysitting Serafina's friends' children for free. Started suggesting that if they needed financial help, they should perhaps cut back on Serafina's luxury purchases first. The pushback was immediate and vicious. They tried every manipulation technique in their arsenal. Guilt, anger, playing the victim, threatening to kick me out. That last one was actually useful. I consulted with a tenants' rights lawyer, free consultation through the clinic, and learned exactly what legal steps they'd have to take to evict me. Turned out it wasn't as simple as they thought. I had rights, even without a lease, and the eviction process would take months, during which time I could document every hostile act. I wasn't planning to let it get that far, but knowing I had options made me bolder. I picked up extra shifts at a coffee shop. The pay was terrible, but the tips were decent, and more importantly, the schedule was flexible. I needed to be available for Jax's school appointments, doctor visits, anything that would create an official record of his well-being and needs. When Jax came home with a note from his teacher expressing concern that he seemed unusually withdrawn and startled by loud noises, I didn't hide it. I brought it to his pediatrician and asked for it to be noted in his medical file. The doctor asked gentle questions about the home environment. I answered honestly, but without dramatics. Yes, my sister sometimes used harsh discipline. Yes, my parents supported her methods. No, I didn't think Jax felt safe at home. The doctor documented all of it, recommended counseling, gave me resources for family services. I took everything she offered and added it to my growing file. I was working 3 jobs at this point: coffee shop mornings, community center afternoons, freelance bookkeeping nights after Jax went to sleep. I was exhausted down to my bones. But exhaustion was familiar. I'd been tired my whole life. What was new was the sense of purpose driving me forward. Every dollar I saved went into a separate account my parents didn't know about. Every piece of documentation went into a folder locked in my car. Every contact I made, every resource I learned about, every procedure I memorized became another tool in my arsenal. Serafina's abuse escalated because that's what abusers do when they sense their victim pulling away. She couldn't consciously articulate that I was changing, but she felt the shift. The power dynamic was wobbling, and she needed to reassert control. She started targeting Jax when I wasn't in the room. Quick, brutal moments designed to leave him frightened but not visibly injured. A hand over his mouth to muffle his cries, fingers digging into pressure points, whispered threats about what would happen if he told me. But Jax did tell me, because I'd been very, very careful to teach him that his words mattered to me, that I would always believe him, that telling the truth would never get him in trouble with me. Each incident got recorded. Each threat got documented. I started using my phone to record audio when I left the room, placed strategically where I knew Serafina liked to corner him. Was it legal? Admissibility varies by state. But I wasn't planning to use it in court. I was planning to use it to understand patterns, to predict behavior, to be ready. I consulted with a family law attorney using my carefully saved money. She was frank with me in a way I appreciated. Emotional abuse is real and devastating, but it's hard to prove in court. You need either extensive documentation showing a clear pattern, or you need physical evidence, or you need witnesses willing to testify, preferably all 3. I have documentation, I said, showing her my notebook. She flipped through it, her expression growing more serious. This is good. Very good, actually. You're creating a timeline that would be hard to refute. But you need more. Medical records showing the impact on your son, school reports, statements from mandated reporters like teachers or doctors who've expressed concerns. I'm working on it, I said. Good. And you need to think about your endgame. Are you trying to get custody and move out, get a restraining order? What's your goal? I'd thought about this in the dark hours of the night when I couldn't sleep. I want legal protection for my son. I want documentation that proves these people are harmful so that if they ever try to claim I'm an unfit mother, or try to get grandparents' rights, or try anything at all, there's a record. I want to make it impossible for them to hurt him without consequences. She nodded slowly. That's achievable. But it's going to require you to make some hard choices. And they're going to fight back. Let them fight. I said, I've got nothing left to lose. That wasn't quite true. I had Jax, and I'd lose anything except him. But she understood what I meant. I kept working my jobs, kept documenting, kept building my case. Months passed. Jax turned 8. He was more anxious than any child should be, jumping at shadows, having nightmares, struggling in school because he was too worried about what awaited him at home to focus on his lessons. His teacher called me in for a conference. Mrs. Patterson was a 20-year veteran with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Jax is a sweet boy, she said carefully, but I'm concerned about some behaviors I'm seeing. The flinching when someone raises their voice. The way he apologizes constantly, even for things that aren't his fault. The bruises. My heart stopped. Bruise. Small ones. On his arms. Mostly. He says he's clumsy. That he bumps into things. But Ms. Bennett, I've been teaching long enough to know the difference between accident-prone and something else. He took a shaky breath. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm a mandated reporter. And I'm required by law to report suspected abuse. But before I do, I wanted to talk to you. To see if there's something you want to tell me. This was the moment. The tipping point. I could deny everything. Protect the family's image. Keep pretending. Or I could let someone else into this nightmare and risk everything. I showed her my notebook. Mrs. Patterson read through it in silence, her face growing paler with each page. When she finished, she looked at me with something that might have been respect. You've been documenting this for 8 months, she said quietly. 9 now, I corrected. Why didn't you report this yourself? Because I needed to be sure. I needed evidence that couldn't be dismissed. I needed to understand the system well enough to navigate it. And I needed to be ready for the fallout. Because my parents have money and connections, and they'll fight dirty. Mrs. Patterson nodded. I'm going to file a report with CPS today. With your permission, I'd like to include your documentation as supporting evidence. It's going to start an investigation. Your parents are going to know it came from the school. This is going to get messy. I know. I said, I'm ready. I wasn't sure if that was true, but I was as ready as I'd ever be. The CPS investigator arrived 3 days later. Her name was Angela Chen, and she had the exhausted, wary look of someone who'd seen too much human ugliness. She interviewed Jax at school first, using the gentle, indirect techniques they train for. She asked about his favorite games, his friends, his daily routine. Slowly, carefully, she asked if anyone at home ever made him feel scared. Jax, my brave boy, told her everything. Not dramatically, not with exaggeration, just the plain truth in his small, serious voice. He told her about Serafina hitting him, about the mean things she said, about how Grandpa thought it was fine and Grandma never stopped it, about how his mom tried to protect him but couldn't always be there. Angela Chen then came to the house. My parents were polite but cold, the way people are when they believe they're above reproach. Serafina put on her most charming smile, the one she used to win pageants, and played the concerned aunt who just wanted the best for her nephew. Angela asked to speak with me privately. We sat in my car, the only space I considered truly mine. Your documentation is the most thorough I've seen from a family member in years, she said. Most people don't understand what we need to build a case. They report things emotionally, which is understandable. But it doesn't hold up. Your approach is different. I work with family services volunteers, I said carefully. I know what matters. She studied me. You've been planning this. I've been protecting my son, I corrected. There's a difference. Is there? But she said it gently, not accusingly. Look, I'm going to be honest with you. What you've documented shows a clear pattern of emotional abuse and physical discipline that crosses lines. The problem is, cases like this rarely result in removal. Unless there's immediate danger or severe physical harm, we usually work with families to improve the situation. My stomach dropped. So nothing changes. I didn't say that. I'm opening an investigation. Your family will be required to cooperate with home visits and interviews. If your sister's behavior continues, especially with documented evidence, we can pursue more serious interventions, and with your documentation, if you choose to pursue custody arrangements or restraining orders through family court, you'll have strong support. It wasn't the immediate salvation I'd been hoping for, but it was the system finally seeing what I'd been screaming into the void about for years. The next few weeks were psychological warfare. My parents didn't confront me directly. Instead, they did what they did best. They played victim, telling everyone who would listen that CPS had been called on them by vindictive school officials, that it was all a misunderstanding, that they were being persecuted for traditional parenting methods. Serafina posted on social media about being targeted by cancel culture and attacked for setting boundaries with a difficult child. Her friends rallied around her, leaving supportive comments about how hard it is to help family members who don't appreciate you. The gaslighting was industrial strength. But it didn't work on me anymore because I had something they didn't. Documentation, facts, official reports, a paper trail that couldn't be charmed away or rewritten with pretty words. Angela Chen made surprise visits. She caught Serafina berating Jax in the backyard when she thought no one official was watching. She witnessed my father's contemptuous dismissal of Jax's feelings. She noted my mother's complete emotional absence. She also noted that I had a safe, clean room for Jax, that he was up to date on vaccinations, that he was enrolled in counseling, that despite everything, I was somehow keeping him fed, clothed, and attending school regularly. "You're doing everything right," Angela told me during one visit. "I know it doesn't feel like enough, but you're building a foundation. Keep documenting, keep advocating, keep being present." Then came the incident that changed everything. Mrs. Davis, our neighbor, called me at work. She was crying. "Lana, I'm so sorry. I should have said something sooner. I just witnessed. I saw... Oh God. What happened? I was already running to my car. I was getting mail, and I saw through your parents' living room window. That girl, your sister, she was hitting Jax. Not spanking, hitting, and he was trying to get away, and she just kept. Did you call the police?" I called CPS. They said someone would come. But Lana, it was bad. I'm so sorry I haven't spoken up before now. I've heard things, seen things, but I didn't want to interfere. And now I feel terrible. "It's okay," I said, even though it wasn't. "Thank you for calling now." I broke every speed limit getting home. By the time I arrived, there was a police car in the driveway. Angela Chen was there. Another CPS worker. Jax was sitting in Angela's car, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm day, shaking. I ran to him. He threw himself into my arms and sobbed, and I held him while Angela explained. "Mrs. Davis's call gave us grounds for an emergency response. We've documented visible injuries on Jax, bruising consistent with striking. Your sister has been arrested for child abuse. She'll be released on bail, but there will be conditions." My father appeared in the doorway, face purple with rage. "This is your doing," he screamed at me. "You poisoned that old woman against us. You've been planning this. You've destroyed this family." "I didn't destroy anything," I said, my voice steady, even though I was trembling. "I documented what was already happening. There's a difference. Get out." My father spat. "Get out of my house. You're not welcome here anymore." "Gladly," I said. I've been ready to leave for a long time. I'd been secretly moving my and Jax's essentials to a storage unit for weeks, preparing for this moment. It took me 2 hours to pack the rest, load it into my car, and drive away from that house with Jax buckled safely beside me. We stayed in a motel that night. It was cheap and the sheets were thin and the traffic noise was loud, but Jax fell asleep quickly, his hand in mine, looking more peaceful than he had in years. I didn't sleep. I sat up watching him breathe, processing everything, feeling the weight of what came next. We had nowhere permanent to go. I had minimal savings. My parents would absolutely try to make my life hell legally and socially, but we were out. We were safe. And I had documentation. The next day, I met with my lawyer again. I need to file for emergency custody and a restraining order. I said, I need to ensure my parents and sister cannot access my son unsupervised. Ever. She reviewed the new police report. Mrs. Davis's statement. The CPS findings. This changes things significantly. With a witnessed incident and an arrest, we have immediate grounds. I can have preliminary paperwork filed today. Do it, I said. The legal battle was exactly as ugly as I'd anticipated. My parents hired an expensive attorney who tried to paint me as unstable, vindictive, and unfit. They claimed I'd coached Jax to lie. They insisted Serafina's discipline was appropriate, and I was too permissive. They brought in character witnesses, who testified to Serafina's kindness and my jealousy, but I had my notebook. I had medical records. I had school reports. I had CPS documentation. I had Mrs. Davis's testimony. I had Angela Chen's professional assessment. Most importantly, I had my detailed timeline that showed this wasn't a one-time incident or a false allegation. It was a pattern, sustained and documented over nearly a year. By someone who'd been methodically preparing to protect her child. The judge was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and reading glasses on a chain. She reviewed everything with the care it deserved, asking pointed questions, taking notes. When she delivered her ruling, my father's lawyer objected 3 times. The judge overruled him each time with increasing irritation. I find the evidence presented by Miss Bennett to be credible, thorough, and deeply concerning, she said. The documentation provided demonstrates a clear pattern of emotional and physical abuse directed at a minor child by the respondent, Ms. Serafina Bennett. With the knowledge and tacit approval of the child's grandparents, Mr. and Mrs. Robert and Eleanor Bennett. She granted me full legal custody of Jax. She issued a restraining order preventing Serafina from coming within 500 feet of him. She mandated that any contact between Jax and his grandparents be supervised and contingent on their completion of parenting classes and family therapy. My father stood up, face contorted with fury. This is outrageous. We're being punished for loving our daughter. The judge looked at him over her glasses. Sir, you're being held accountable for enabling abuse of your grandson. There's a significant difference. This hearing is adjourned. We left the courthouse in silence. My lawyer squeezed my shoulder. You did it. You protected him. It's not over, I said. Because I knew my parents, they wouldn't accept this. I was right. The harassment started immediately. Phone calls at all hours. Letters delivered to my new apartment. Social media posts from Serafina playing the victim, claiming I'd turned her nephew against her out of jealousy. My father showed up at Jax's school one afternoon, demanding to see his grandson. The school security, who'd been briefed on the restraining order, escorted him off property. He was charged with violating the order. The charges were later dropped as a first offense, but it established a pattern. Eleanor tried a softer approach, sending gifts and cards, trying to position herself as the reasonable one, being kept from her beloved grandchild by her unstable daughter. I documented every attempt at contact and reported them to my lawyer. The truth is, enforcing boundaries with people who've never respected them is exhausting. It would have been easier in some ways to just give in. Let them have supervised visits. Try to rebuild something resembling a relationship. But every time I was tempted, I'd look at Jax. At the way he played now without constantly looking over his shoulder. At how his shoulders weren't permanently hunched in anticipation of criticism. At the way he'd started laughing again. Real laughs that came from his belly. I enrolled him in therapy. His counselor was a gentleman named Dr. Marcus who specialized in childhood trauma. Jax is resilient. Dr. Marcus told me after a few sessions. But he's been living in survival mode. It's going to take time for him to trust that this stability is permanent. I'll give him all the time he needs. I said, And yourself, doctor? Marcus asked. Who's supporting you through this? I didn't have a good answer. I'd burned so much energy on surviving and protecting that I hadn't thought much about my own healing. But he was right. I needed it too. I started seeing a therapist of my own. A woman named Dr. Patterson who didn't let me hide behind my competence and planning. She made me talk about the grief of losing parents I'd never really had. About the anger I'd suppressed for decades. About the guilt I carried for not protecting Jack sooner. You did protect him, she said firmly. The moment you could do so effectively, you acted. You didn't just react emotionally. You built a case that would actually work. That took incredible strength and patience. It took too long. I whispered. It took exactly as long as it needed to. If you'd acted impulsively, without documentation, without understanding the system, you might have lost custody entirely. Your parents could have painted you as unstable and gotten legal guardianship. You played the long game. And it saved your son. Those words helped. Not completely. Not immediately. But gradually, Jax and I built a life together in our small 2-bedroom apartment. I kept working multiple jobs until I finished my degree in social work. The online program I'd enrolled in as cover for my investigation had become genuinely meaningful. I wanted to help other parents navigate the system I'd had to teach myself. Eventually, I got a job at the Family Advocacy Center where I'd volunteered. The pay was better than the coffee shop and diner combined. And I had actual benefits for the first time in Jax's life. We could breathe a little. Jax thrived. His grades improved. He made friends. He joined the school's art club and discovered he had a talent for drawing. His teacher called me one day to say she'd submitted one of his pieces to a young artist's showcase, and it had been selected. I went to the showcase and stood in front of his drawing. It showed a small figure standing on a mountain peak with the sun rising behind him. The title was Morning After the Storm. I cried right there in the middle of the gallery. And I didn't care who saw. My parents tried one last manipulation about 2 years after the court order. Eleanor showed up at my workplace, looking frail and elderly in a way I'd never seen before. She asked to speak with me privately, against my better judgment. I agreed to a conversation in the building's lobby, where there were cameras and witnesses. I want to see my grandson, she said, and her voice actually shook. I know things went badly. I know we made mistakes, but I'm getting older. Lana, I don't know how much time I have left. The guilt trip was powerful. This was my mother, the woman who'd given birth to me. Maybe people could change. Maybe she'd learned. But then she added, and Serafina has been going through such a hard time. She's in therapy now, working on herself. She misses Jax terribly. And there it was. This wasn't about wanting to see Jax for his sake. It was about wanting me to provide emotional support for Serafina. Again. Still. Always. No. I said simply. Eleanor's expression hardened. You can't keep him from his family forever. I'm not keeping him from his family. I'm his family. I'm protecting him from people who hurt him and never once apologized or took accountability. We were trying to make him strong. She said. You were breaking him. I replied. And you still don't see the difference. That's why the answer is no. She left, and I never heard from her again. I learned through extended family that she and my father moved to Florida shortly after. Serafina married again. Another wealthy man she'd charmed. They sent a Christmas card once with a generic greeting and no personal message. I didn't respond. Jax is 12 now. He's tall for his age and still loves art. He's thinking about architecture when he's older. He wants to design buildings that make people feel safe. When he was 10, he asked me about his grandparents and aunt. Will I ever see them again? I thought carefully about my answer. Maybe someday. When you're older. If you want to, and if they've genuinely changed. But only if you want to. And only if I'm certain you'll be safe. Do you think they'll change? He asked. I don't know. Sweetheart. People can change if they really want to. But they have to want to. And they have to do the work. I can't make them do that. He nodded, processing. Then he said, I'm glad we left. Me too. Buddy. Me too. Last month, Jax brought home a permission slip for a field trip that required a parent volunteer. In the section asking for emergency contacts, he'd written my name 3 times in slightly different ways because he said he couldn't think of anyone else and wanted to make sure I'd be the one called no matter what. The teacher apologized for not catching it before sending it home. I told her not to worry about it. I signed it as his primary contact and as his emergency contact and as his volunteer parent, and I didn't feel sad. I felt victorious. Because here's what I learned through all of this. Revenge doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to be public destruction or viral callouts or cinematic confrontations. Sometimes, The most powerful revenge is simply refusing to participate in your own diminishment anymore. My parents wanted a compliant daughter who'd sacrifice everything for their golden child. I gave them boundaries instead. Serafina wanted an easy target for her cruelty. I gave her legal consequences instead. They wanted me to stay small and grateful for scraps. I chose dignity instead. Every day that Jax wakes up feeling safe is my revenge. Every time he laughs without fear is my victory. Every moment I spend not seeking their approval, not craving their love, not destroying myself to earn something they were never going to give me, is me winning. I didn't burn their lives down. I didn't need to. I simply stopped setting myself on fire to keep them warm. And it turns out, they had no idea how to generate their own heat. They're probably not miserable. People like them rarely are. They've likely found new narratives where they're the victims of their ungrateful daughter. They've probably convinced themselves they did nothing wrong. And you know what? That's fine. They can live in whatever reality they construct. I don't have to be part of it anymore. I have a son who knows he's loved unconditionally. I have a career helping other families escape the situations I barely survived. I have a small apartment that's more home than that mansion ever was. I have peace. That's my revenge. Building something beautiful from the ashes of the family that tried to erase me, thriving in the space they thought I'd never escape. So here's what I want you to take away from my story. If you're in a toxic relationship, whether it's family, romantic, or friendship, document everything. Understand the systems designed to help you. Build your case patiently. Don't act impulsively out of rage because abusers are experts at using your emotions against you. And know this. You are not obligated to light yourself on fire to keep anyone else warm. You are not required to accept abuse because it's wrapped in the language of love or tradition or family. You don't owe anyone access to you or your children if that access causes harm. The people who truly love you want you to be safe and whole. Everyone else is just using you. Choose yourself. Choose your safety. Choose peace over performance, because the best revenge against people who tried to make you small is simply becoming too big for their boxes. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to make the hard choice to cut off toxic family members? How did you find the strength to do it? Drop your story in the comments. Hit that like button if this resonated with you. And subscribe, because I share more stories about finding strength in impossible situations. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.